Yo, Chuck.
So you can see we've got this mangled array. There's nested elements inside of nested elements. And we want to make it flat and pretty so there's no nesting. So JavaScript has a built-in method actually called flat, .flat like that can do the trick. So if I have a nested array, let's just make one real quick, and I pass in something nested. So if I just return this by itself, you can see it's nested and just mangled, right? But if I use the .flat method, it fixes it, which is cool. But the problem with .flat is it only goes one layer deep. So if I was to have another nested element within inside this nested element, let's just put a random number in there. And now if I run flat, you can see it didn't completely fix everything. So to get that to work and have it be completely flat, I have to run it again. So let's run it again. And then now you can see it's completely flattened the array. So the reason I'm showing you this is to explain that if we're going to flatten this array with recursion, we're going to need to run .flat a bunch of times depending on the amount of array elements nested inside the array. So to do that, the first thing we're going to do is just loop over the data, okay? So we're just going to make a for loop. And I want to evaluate each element in this array of data and test if it's an array. In JavaScript, there's a method that does this called Array.isArray. And then you just pass in a value, and then it'll return true or false. So just to show you real quick, we can do that with, if I was just to pass in a string, this should return false because it's not an array value, and it does. But if I pass in an array value, this should return true because it is an array, and it does. So that looks good. So we're going to use this to our advantage and check each element if it's an array or not, okay? So let's go back to our for loop here. For simplicity and readability, I'm going to make a variable called current, which is just going to be the first element at that index. To make sure everything's running properly, I'm going to console.log out current just to see that it's running. So let's go. And you can see it is tracking every value as the index increases. So you have 1, then you have this mangled array of nested stuff, then 3, and then so on and so on. So this is looking good. So now, like I said before, we're going to need to check each current value to see if it's an array or not, and then we're going to do something. So the best way to do this is make an if statement and say if, and then we're going to use that Array.isArray, pass in the current value. So if the current value is an array, we want to do something. And what we're going to want to do is actually return this function, flatten with recursion, and instead of just passing in our original array, which is all mangled, we're going to pass in the array.flat. What this is going to do is flatten the array one time, and then it's going to come back to here, and then it's going to say, okay, are there any more elements that are arrays? Oh, yes, there are. So then we're going to run it again and flatten it again. It's going to continue flattening itself, basically, until all the elements are no longer arrays. Okay, so that looks good. Now we need to have some type of way to store values that are not arrays. So I'm just going to make a variable called result. It's just going to be an empty array like that. So if the value is not an array, I'm going to push it to that result variable. So we'll say result push, and then we'll just say current. And then I'm going to get out of this for loop, and at the end, when everything's done, I'm just going to return that result variable, Now let's see what happens when I run this. Okay, you can see it's flattened everything. So let's just kind of recap what's happening here. So it's looping through the entire array. If one of the elements is a array, it's going to run flat, and then it's going to start all over again, and then come back here. Oh, is this element an array? Flat. If it's not, then I'll push it to result. But you can tell every time the flatten with recursion function is called, result is just clearing itself. It's not until all the elements are successfully transformed from arrays into just regular numbers that we actually get the final result, and then we're able to return it. So that is how to do flattening of an array with recursion. Hope you guys enjoyed that video. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.